Assalamualaikum and good morning. So for today's lesson, we will look into chapter 4 of your thesis, of your report, which is on the system design and development. Okay, we have looked into chapter 1, the revision for chapter 1, chapter 2, which is on literature review. We also have looked into chapter 3, what should we include in chapter 3. So now we want to look into chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 4 will be new for this semester. So you need to write your chapter 4, which will include a system design and development. So in this chapter, you will discuss a further detail of your design. Actually, in last semester, during your CSP 600, you already discussed your design in chapter 3. You have your UML diagram, you have your flowchart, you also have your testing plan and whatsoever. But for this semester, you need to extend your design into system design and development. But this is optional. Some of the domains, some of the research area, they might not need this chapter 4 because they already include everything in chapter 3. Okay, but most of the research area, they will need this chapter 4 to extend, to show the detail, to explain the detail, to discuss the detail of their system design. Okay, so we will look what we need to write in our system design and development. This is chapter 4. We have another chapter 5, which is for result and analysis, result and discussions, and we have a chapter 6 for discussions as well. Okay, so for today we look into chapter 4, which is system design and development. So we will look into the introductions of this chapter, the system design as well as system development. Okay, so for introduction, so system design and development, actually in chapter 3, we put it in chapter 3 in previous semester under a subtopic design and development. So in chapter 3, we have our research methodology. In one of the phases is design. So we put all the design inside that phase. Okay. So or create a separate chapter. So we also can create in this semester. We also can create a separate chapter for discussing design only. Okay, just to discuss the design phases. So we put it under chapter 4. So the design to include in chapter 3 or chapter 4 is mainly depend on how many functions that you want to discuss. Some of the project that have lots of functions, then you need chapter 4 to discuss it in detail. Okay, so when in the chapter 3, you will only discuss it the summary of the design, means that the overview, just an overview, general overview of your design. But in chapter 4, you will discuss it in detail. So in chapter 3, on the design phase, you will talk about what are the design that you're going to discuss, like system design, interface design, database design, what is it, and the detail will be discussed in chapter 4. So you will mention that in your chapter 3 if you create your chapter 4. Otherwise, you can maintain it in chapter 3 if not much function you want to discuss. But most students will do chapter 4 because they have a lot to discuss in the design phase. So if there is a lot of function and many design involved, then you can consider to create separate chapter to discuss system design and development, which is this one, chapter 4. You need to discuss the appropriate content of this chapter with your supervisor. So you need to discuss what you want to include in this chapter based on your research area. You can use the suggestion in this slide as a guideline to start writing your system and development report. So here in this slide, I will show you some guideline what you need to include. But this is not compulsory because it will be based on your research area. So discuss it with your supervisor for detailed content of chapter 4. Okay, so I will give in the slide, just a rough idea. So what you can include in this chapter. So guideline to write chapter 4, there are 5 main components you can discuss in this chapter. This is just a guideline, okay? So the first one is analysis requirement of your system. You can put it here, the requirement for your system design, your system development, system implementation, as well as testing. Yeah, so the testing plan of your research. So for analysis requirement of the system, so what kind of requirement that you can include in your research, in your report, is the hardware requirement. What are the, maybe the PC, the laptop that you use, the machine that you use, maybe the device that you use, and you can put it here. The software requirement, the software that you use in your to develop your system, or to pre-process your system, what is it? Okay, and as well as the data requirement. Okay, what are the data that you use, where you get it from, what is the formats of data, is it image, is it a text file, is it a code? So what kind of data that you use, you can write it down here. For next one is a system design. There's a lot actually. Actually, the writing will be under the system design. You can put the diagram of the overall process of your system. Okay, then only then you can split it into a sub process. Okay, maybe if you do a system recommendations, you need the whole process of the recommendations. Okay, under the recommendation part, you have a sub process. Maybe the first sub process will be filtering the content. The next process will be the recommendations part. The next process may be the cleaning of the data. That will be the sub process of the overall process that you have. So you can split each of the process into a sub process X, sub process Y. So mention what is X. Maybe X is the filtering. Y maybe is the cleaning of your data. And another sub process may be the recommendation parts. If for someone that do image processing, maybe they have a feature extraction part. So maybe that can be another sub process. So means that each of the sub process will have their algorithm, will have their flow chart, yeah, to show what actually happened in that process. You do the cleaning of your data. What actually the process of cleaning your data? Maybe first is extract. After extract is removing some not important word, maybe, yeah. So that you need to explain it in detail, each of the sub process. Okay, first is the overall, then you pick up from the overall process. Maybe they have a several flows, several steps. So each of the step you explain it in detail on the sub process. Okay, and then you also can talk about the logical design. Logical design is the database design, how actually your table are related to each other, the ERD. Okay, what will be the column, what will be the data for each of the table that you have, and what did you include in the table. Okay, what are the record that you want to keep. So that is under logical design. You also can include interface design, the interface that you have. Maybe if you're doing game, you have level 1, level 2, level 3. If you have recommendation system, maybe you have a module, registration module. You might have a recommendation module. You might have the admin module, for example. So each of the interface that you design, you need to include it here and explain it well. Okay. So this is example of logical design. Apart from doing a ERD diagram, you can do it something like this. So we can see what is the relations, what are the table that you have for your project. So you can do something like this, logical design. You need to put in the design phase, you might have a lots of figure, and make sure you explain each of the figure. Don't just put your figure and the label of figure, then you leave it just like that. You need to explain any figure that you put inside your report. You need to explain what that figure is all about. Discuss it. Okay, don't just put your figure without any explanations. For interface design, you can discuss your interface design according to module, as I said before, that or for your system. For example, if you have 3 modules, so the suggested structure would be like interface design. There are 3 modules in this system. Okay, so you write first one is login module. So what is it? What interface we have? You have figure 4.1 to discuss on. Figure 4.2 is what? Okay. Next one, you might have a prediction module. You might have a several pages to display for a prediction modules. So discuss what is it. The first figure is about what. The second figure is about what. The third one is suggestion module. Maybe after you predict, you have to suggest something to your user, recommend something to your user. So what is it? The first figure would suggest what? Second figure would suggest what? Okay, if you do a data visualizations, the first interface here will visualize according to what analysis. The second figure here will uh, will visualize according to what data, for example. So discuss it maybe based on module. So depend on your research. Okay, next is under the system development. This is a flowchart of your algorithm. Okay, so you can also include several algorithm, as I mentioned in your research area. You might use a different algorithm, not only one. For example, a recommendation system, you might have an algorithm for filtering. You might have an algorithm to clean your data. You might have an algorithm to calculate the shortest paths. Then you might have algorithm for calculating your recommendations. So each of the algorithm, you need to write it down, either using a pseudocode or an algorithm. Yeah. For example, if you create a recommendation system, right? So using content-based filtering, you could discuss algorithm used for extracting data, pre-processing data, modeling, for example, the modeling, and calculate severity, for example. So for recommended system, you already have 4 to discuss here. What other algorithm use? Some of research, they might use a randomize to random the output, for example. So that is also included in algorithm. So whatever is the algorithm that you use, discuss it in this section for the development. Okay, then system implementations. So you need to list the features of your system, as well as screenshot of your system for each features. What are the features that you have? This is not compulsory. It will be based on your research area. Some might put the system development inside the design. They already put it in design, so you don't have to put it under development. So you just discuss how you conduct the development process. What are the module that you have developed in your system development? So how you develop that module. Maybe one module is you modeling using a MATLAB, for example. Then the interface, you are using a Python. So discuss it, how you develop your each of the module that you have for your system. Okay, then the last part will be the testing. Okay, so this is a must. Also, every research need to have a testing. Normally, there are three types of testing for CS230 students. We have a functional testing, that is the simplest one. All of the student needs to do the functional test. Functional test means that student need to test the functions of the system, whether their buttons is working, whether the function that let's say they want, if they click the button, they should generate something that makes sure it is working. Okay, for example, the registrations, user need to fill up all the field inside the form, then make sure it is working. Okay, so you have to make sure all that is working correctly. Okay, in the testing part, you need to discuss what kinds of testing you want to do. So you have to state it in your report. I want to do functional, I want to do accuracy testing, I want to do usability testing. So write it down in your report. What are types of the experiment, the testing you want to do. Maybe you want to do usability, you want to do your questionnaire. So state it what kind of questions that you use. Okay, so in this section, you don't need to put the result of your testing yet. This is just a testing plan. So means that you plan, okay, let's say I want to do a usability testing, means that I will pass the questionnaire, I will design a questionnaire, I will give this questionnaire to the audience, so to the users, so in this chapter you only need to write what is the questions, who is your audience, how are you going to distribute it to your audience, maybe online, maybe you have to go to the place, so explain it, who will be your respondent, just that. Okay, the result of the questionnaire, the response from the questionnaire letter, the result would be put inside chapter 5, result and analysis letter. Okay, the result will be insert into chapter 5. Okay, not under this chapter. This chapter is only for you to discuss your planning. How are you going to conduct it? Okay. Okay, for example, you say you want to do a functional test, so you need to list out the test cases. For example, I have a login, I want to test this function when my system is ready. Okay, my system is complete. So test number 1, you said description, clicking the login from the PR form, so invalid user and password receptionist. So so for login, there are two conditions. If they give the invalid password, what should happen? If they give the valid password or username, what should happen? So for example, here they said username ABC, password ABC. So the description here, if they click the login PR form, invalid username and password by receptionist. So expected a message box should display which contain invalid username and password. So if the user enter invalid data, how your system should react, how your system should respond. So my system should respond by giving a message box saying that you have entered invalid username. So make sure when your system is complete, your system should be able to respond to these kinds of data, invalid data. Okay, clicking the login invalid user name and password by doctor. So here it says username doctor, password ABC. So a message box should display which contain invalid username and password. So this is the case for if it is invalid. Yeah. So if it's valid, if it's correct, then there is another test cases. So you need to also say what should your system respond if they give valid login detail. Okay, so that is expected. So you should be able to expect what your system should respond. Okay, so there is another column there, actual result. Leave it blank in this semester, in this chapter 4. So the actual result, you will only have that result in chapter 5 later. You need to write it in chapter 5 when you write your chapter 5, which is on result and analysis. You need that result later, yeah, in chapter 5. Okay. This is another example of a functional test plan. Clicking the delete button, data not deleted from tables, supposedly. Just delete it from the interface, maybe, yeah, for this case. So actual result. So you need to test it when your system is complete. You need to test it when you click the delete button. So make sure the data is not deleted from the table. So you need to write down what will be the actual result, yeah. Clicking on the submit button without filling the form. So the form will be not submitted or give some error message, supposedly. Okay, so if they have not filled up some part of the form, then the system should respond. You should, there is information missing. Okay, for example, name or address, something like that. So give an error message to user. So this is example, yeah? And you can read it, the rest of it. So you can do something like this as well. That the previous one is one of example. You can do like this as well. Okay, you can do like a title. This is for sign up. Okay, so prerequisite, you need to, in order to sign up, you have a full name, username, and password. So the task action is start to ask a user to write down the applications, fill in the details of sign up page of the admin. That is the actions. So expected result is on signing up, it should create admin account. Okay, it should create admin account. So the testing number 2 is for login. So what is it? What it will be your prerequisite? What the user should enter? What is the test actions? What the system will do? Then the expected result should be what? Okay. Okay, this is example of system usability test. A usability test normally come with a questionnaire. So this is one of the example. Okay, I took it from Digital Equipment Corporation. There is a lot of example in the internet. You can type the system usability test or SUS. Yeah. Then we'll give you example of usability test. Usability test is actually you give your system to the user to try and ask the opinions of your user. Okay, for example, I think that I would like to use this system frequently. This is about your system, whether they like it or not, whether they feel it easy to use or not. That is a usability test. Okay. So I found the system unnecessarily complex. Maybe they found it too complex. I thought the system was easy to use. Okay, I think that I would need to support a technical person to be able to use the system. So how the user feel when they use your system? This is usability test. Normally, usability test will be, if you can do up to usability test, that would be great. Yeah, especially the one that do games and need to test it to a user. It is advisable to test it to an appropriate user. Okay, and the other system as well. If you could come up with a usability test, that would be good. Yeah, so the most basic one would be functional test. And some of the research might need accuracy tests, like for image processing, they need accuracy for the image they have predicted. Okay, and some other research might need a usability test to show that the system is doing okay. Yeah? So this is the example. So you just leave the questions like that in your chapter 4. So you need to analyze the response that you get from the user. You need to summarize it, analyze it, and put in chapter 4, on chapter 5. So in chapter 5, you don't need to screenshot each of the respondents' answer, but you need to summarize all the respondents' answer in maybe in a pie chart, maybe in the form of histogram. So summarize it, put it in chapter 5 later on your result. Okay, so that is all for chapter 4 that you need to include all the information. And again, I would say this is just a guideline. You have to discuss further with your supervisor on the appropriate content for your chapter 4. Different research area might have a different way to write your chapter 4, but this is just a guideline. Uh, for just to give you an overview, what can you put inside, what can you insert inside chapter 4. Yeah, so chapter 4 will be the detail of the design and development. Okay, in chapter 3 you already have this phase, design phase, so you might put that summary on that, just an overview in that chapter 3, and the detailed explanation you put in chapter 4, because there is a lot to discuss under design phase. Yeah. So design phase actually is the contributions of your work. So lots of your work actually you is on the design phase. You design it, the system that they develop. So you have to think what will be the suitable design, what will be the suitable algorithm. These would be the main contributions of your research project design phase. Yeah. So most of the evaluator, examiner will look into this phase. They want to know what actually you have done. In chapter 2, you discuss what actually other people have done. So in this chapter, they want to see what are the design, what are the development, what are the algorithm that you yourself has look into, that you yourself have explored and do it. Okay, this is the main contributions of your research project, for your FYP. So the content for chapter 4 in this presentation slide can be used as a guideline to write your chapter 4. You can decide and adjust your content appropriately based on your area of study and the agreement with your supervisor. Okay, your supervisor need to agree with it. Okay, don't do it alone. You need to get an advice from your supervisor, and don't do it until the end of semester. Okay, so do it during your meeting every week, the weekly meeting with your supervisor. Ask their opinion. Okay, so the actual result in the test plan will be filled in chapter 5, so result and analysis. So in this chapter letter, you only need to write suggestion. Okay, in this chapter 4, you just need to write suggestion of the test plan, as I have discussed. So what features to test and expected output, what you expect. Okay, so the result later you will discuss it further in chapter 5. Okay, so that's it for chapter 4 for your FYP report. So I hope that you can understand and get some idea of what you need to write in your chapter 4. Okay, thank you very much.